Righty. Welcome in, everybody. We are so glad to have you all here. We'll give it a couple minutes for others to join us and get all settled in. Awesome. All right. Well, welcome in, everybody. I am so glad that you are joining us today. And if you're here, chances are you've been feeling like something needs to change in your own career. Maybe you are a little miserable, maybe something is misaligned, you might be bored, you might be burnt out, maybe underutilized, and just ready for a new challenge overall. You also might just be trying to make a change, but aren't sure how to position yourself for that next move. So if that's the case, I wanted to start this off by saying that you are not alone. That's why we created this training today. And we're going to walk you through what a mid-year reset actually looks like, and really just how to take control of your career pivot in a way that feels strategic and empowering. We are going to use what we call our GLOW method. For those of you who have been with us before, I'm sure you are very familiar with this, as we kind of structured our last monthly training around this framework. And we're going to continue with that as well. So if you're new today, we'll walk you through that in the beginning of this event. And we're also going to share some examples along the way. So just a reminder to download our slides and workbook, which you can find in both the descriptions on our LinkedIn event and our YouTube event. I did also put those in the chat for you as well. All right. Awesome. So welcome in, everyone. My name's Christina, and I'm the Senior Director of Training and Coaching here at Work It Daily. And I am really excited to just welcome you all to the session. I've been in career coaching and training for over 5 years now, and I can honestly say that I truly, truly enjoy helping professionals just like yourselves grow, get unstuck and feel confident in your next steps. That's what I really love about what we do here at Work It Daily. And being on both the training and the coaching side, we are deeply committed to making career support, accessible, effective, and personalized. So what we operate on at Work It Daily is what we call the 3 C's. First off, coaching, providing both one-on-one and group guidance to help you navigate challenges and make progress along the way when it comes to your goals. We also have a supportive community. It's a safe, supportive space where you can connect with others who just get it. And then we also have lots of courses and also other step-by-step trainings and bonus tools and resources to help you, build the confidence that you need to succeed. So with today's session, we will show you how you can do this career reset and how that will allow you to grow your career today. So let's jump in. And before we get into our agenda, I did just want to mention very briefly that we do have a special gift for you. So we highly encourage you to stay until the end. We are, though, recording this session, so this will be available after we do go live. In case you have to leave early or maybe you're joining late, we will have a recording available. All right, so let's dive into the agenda for today. I want to give a quick overview in terms of where we're headed. So first, we're going to talk about why mid-year is a smart time to pivot and how to use that to your advantage. Then we're going to get clear on what success actually looks like for you, not just, what the job market says. And then from there, we'll go through a step-by-step and show you how to rebrand your professional identity, how you can also reposition your experience, and overall just build a presence that reflects your own pivot. And then finally, I'm going to show you what to do consistently day by day to keep the momentum going. And we'll also share a special premium coaching opportunity and answer some questions that you have at the end. So, this isn't a passive training. This is, your playbook to reset your career with purpose. And, any questions that you have throughout this session, as long as they relate to this topic, we'll take a couple of those if we have some extra time at the end. Sound good? Awesome. So at Work It Daily, we help people solve career problems using a coaching framework that we call the GLOW method, which is what our CEO and founder, JT O'Donnell, developed. So if you've worked with us before, you've probably seen this. And if you're new, this is how we break down what we call real career growth into something that you can actually take action on. Okay, so starting with the G, this is for gain perspective. It's all about understanding what's really going on, both in your career and also in the job market. We like to always constantly conduct research, do surveys at Work It Daily, speak with recruiters, and just stay up to date on job search and career trends so we can keep you informed and in the loop. Sometimes we feel stuck because we're also not looking at these things. And even just looking at things in the full picture can be difficult sometimes. So that is the G, gaining perspective, really important. Next up is the L. So L is for illuminate the goal. This is where we help you define a direction, not just any goal, one that's aligned with your strengths, your interests, your specialties, and, of course, where the market is headed. That is how we keep your skill building focused. And then next is the O for own your actions. And once you have that sense of clarity, it's time to take your own control over your career. So we'll help you create a plan that is realistic, that fits your lifestyle. And the reason we say this is because when you're consistent and you have this sense of clarity, it works to beat intensity when it comes to your growth. And then lastly, the W, and what we personally find most important is to work it daily. And this is the piece that is most important because it all comes down to that accountability piece. And this also is a part of the framework that a lot of people tend to skip. You have to build habits around your learning, and you need to share your progress. That way you have that sense of authority when it comes to your personal brand. You know how to stay visible to the right people, especially when you're someone who is making a career pivot or maybe a full-on career change. That is something that you want to focus on, spending a little bit of time each day. And we'll get more into the specifics on that in today's session. So that is exactly how today's event will be structured, from gaining perspective and, building a strategy to executing that consistently. So let's dive in. All right. So starting with gain perspective, this will be the first part of today's session, talking more about this topic. And I want to start by sharing why this topic is so important right now, and really the point of this whole training. Because if you've been feeling a little bit uncertain about your next step, or you've been rethinking a couple things about your career, then you want to take a step back. So here's why we're talking about this right now. July is the tipping point of the year. It's when most people realize, I can't keep doing this for another 6 months. I'm not happy in my job. I'm not really reaching career satisfaction anymore. And I'm just kind of sitting here rethinking a couple things. And, maybe your job started off okay, but now some cracks are showing. So you are someone that might be feeling a little disengaged. Maybe you're feeling, undervalued, maybe even burnt out, and the stress is kicking in a bit. And that's not random. That is actually data. So instead of ignoring it, it's time to actually use it. And on the employer side, this is also a key moment. Hiring managers are starting to think about what they need in Q4 and just also into the new year. So they're not waiting until November. They're shortlisting that now. And if you start positioning yourself today, then you can ride that wave. So I want you to think of this like a mid-season game plan adjustment. You've seen the field for 2 quarters. Now it's time to call new plays based on what's actually happening, not what you hoped would happen in January. All right. So that's just a little context around this topic. And now you might be thinking, well, who is this session for? So this session is actually going to be really beneficial for those of you who have said, I want to change, but I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know what I want to be doing. And maybe you've tried making slight tweaks to your resume, to your materials, maybe applying to different types of roles, but you're not getting traction. You're not getting results here. Maybe you're not landing interviews, or you're not hearing back, or just getting rejections. Or maybe you're afraid that if you make the change that you want, you'll be seen as inexperienced or irrelevant, even, overqualified or underqualified. These are all things that, you might be thinking and kind of going around in your head. You also maybe are someone that is shifting from a field like finance to healthcare, or maybe, moving from project management to a training role. Or maybe you're not changing jobs, you're just changing expectations a bit and making a slight pivot. You also could be someone that is looking for more of that deeper meaning in your work. Maybe you want some more flexibility, or just a healthier culture, work-life balance. But here's the thing, without a strategy to explain your shift and understanding what you should be doing to position yourself confidently, it can be very, very easy to get overlooked, especially by the right people. And that is where today's method comes in. So what I'm going to do is walk you through how to build a reset plan that aligns with your skills, your message, your brand, your actions, with the pivot that you actually want to make. So just to give you all some additional context, last month we posted a poll on our LinkedIn page because we wanted to hear directly from professionals, people like you, about what you're struggling with right now with your careers. So at Work It Daily, we always say, your career is your business. And that means regularly checking in to see where your goals and, current path might not be aligned anymore. So we gave folks a few options to choose from. And last month, we actually covered the highest percentage of that vote, which was upskilling and reskilling. And what came right after that was, changing and or resetting career paths. We had a high vote for that. And this told us something very, very important, that a lot of people are feeling stuck or just uncertain in their jobs. So they're craving clarity, they're craving direction, but also a plan to move forward with confidence. And instead of just throwing some more, generalized advice your way, we decided to actually take this feedback and build today's event specifically around that insight. Everything that you are about to learn was crafted with that real world need in mind to help you reset, realign and take back control of your career path. And if that's what you came here for, then you're in the right place. All right, so I want to talk about a pivot mid-year. I know we briefly touched on this, but I do want to take a deeper dive here. You've been living your current work situation for half a year. If it's not serving you now, I don't want you to wait until, that burnout hits in Q4 and, things start to get a little frustrating with hiring being a little bit slower with the holidays approaching and all that fun stuff. So, every week that you delay is another week that you're missing an opportunity. And from a recruiter's perspective, someone who's actually worked with many, many recruiters, right now is when their hiring pressure is picking up. So September through early November is one of the busiest hiring seasons of the year. And if you plant the seeds now, updating your brand, growing your network, and clarifying your pitch, you're going to be ready for that wave. You're going to feel prepared, which will ultimately make you more confident in your brand as well. So like I said, think of it like training in the summer for a fall marathon. The people who prepare now are the ones who cross the finish line in November with a job offer, or hopefully sometime soon. It's unfortunate, you never know exactly how long a job search is going to take, if you're going to get that offer. But by taking these steps and, following along today and using this strategy, you're going to have a higher chance of standing out than others that really don't know these tactics and are just kind of using outdated job search strategies. So let's stop thinking about January as your next fresh start. You have the time now to actually reset and make this happen for yourself. So I want to start by sharing a little bit more about a career pivot and what that is. Too many people hear the word pivot and just ultimately start to panic. They think it means that they are just starting over and starting from scratch. But at Work It Daily, we actually define a pivot as a reroute, not a reset. So think of it like a GPS. You miss a turn, you don't go all the way back to the start. The system will just recalculate based on, where you are now. That's exactly what we're doing with your career. You have the skills, you've gained the experience, and you're delivering the value as you've done in your past roles. And that doesn't disappear. What you just need to do is reframe it so it actually makes sense with your new direction, whether, like I said, it's just a slight pivot or a full-on career change. So for example, let's say that you were a teacher and now you want to move into corporate training. You're not abandoning your classroom experience. You're instead just repositioning it as, instructional design, facilitation, communication, those types of things. And what you're doing is you're translating your value. And we're going to walk you through how to do just that in today's session. So there are actually three main types of pivots that we see over and over in coaching. And knowing which one that you're in will help to shape your entire strategy. So to start, a role pivot is when you're staying in the same industry, but you want to shift what you're doing, like moving from, let's say, project coordination into maybe business development. You're changing your function. You're not changing your entire field here. An industry pivot, number two, is when you keep your skill set, but you apply it to a new space. For example, let's say that we have an HR manager in retail that is transitioning to tech. You already know how to manage people and processes. You're just translating it into a new context, essentially. And then lastly, there's a lifestyle pivot, number three. And this one is all about values. You want maybe remote work. You want more flexibility in your career, maybe more of a work-life balance. Maybe you're looking for something hybrid or remote. Maybe you've been fully on site for a while. Maybe you just even want something with a little bit less stress and more purpose. The job might not look radically different on paper, but the environment that you're seeking truly is. So you may fall into one of these categories, maybe two, maybe all three, and that's okay. The key is just being honest about which version of pivot fits your goals, because that actually determines how you tell your story and what to emphasize in your materials. So I want to actually take a second and ask all of you who are here today and tuned in to share about the pivot that you are making, or should I say pivots. If you are making a role pivot, put a 1 in the chat. If you're making an industry pivot, put a 2. Lifestyle pivot, 3. If it's a mix of these things, put 1, 2, and 3. I'd love to hear and see where all of you are at, and just to see kind of how we can relate on these things. Because at one point or another, you might be changing careers. Maybe right now you are kind of going back and forth, and now is the time that you want to make this change. So I'd love to see, where we're all at and some of the pivots that we're interested in. I love that. Okay, we have a whole mix. I'm seeing lots of 2s, some 1s, even some lifestyle pivots. Awesome. Loving the engagement. We'll come back to that as well. All right, so as we wait for some more of those to come in, I did want to go through and name some of the pivot fears, because they are real and they come up for everyone. So the biggest one is, if I change direction, I'll have to start from the bottom again. That is false. Pivoting isn't about throwing away what you've done. It's just about repositioning it. The second fear after that is, hiring managers won't understand how my experience transfers. They won't, unless you actually go ahead and explain it. That's your job. You're not just applying the jobs. You're making a business case for why you're a smart hire, why you're going to be the aspirin to their pain. This is something that you really clearly need to figure out how to communicate. And we'll show you the frameworks along with this session as well. And then the third fear is, saying things like, well, I won't be competitive with people who have direct experience. And one thing I just want to mention on that topic is that you don't need to be identical to the last person who held that role. You need to be someone who solves their problem in a unique way. All right. One of our members, it was actually in hospitality for, I believe, like 10 or 15 years, and then actually pivoted into event ops at a healthcare company. And you might be thinking, well, why did they do that? Well, because she actually framed her experience as logistics, as customer service, as vendor management, all things that they needed. And that is really, truly showing this power of storytelling and how effective that could be. All right. Now, the next thing, now that we have gained perspective, we've looked at some of the facts and some of the context here, I want to shift this into action. So the next phase is what we call illuminate the goal. Because before you start preparing for a reset, you need a clear destination. So let me ask you this, what does success actually look like for you in this next chapter? And it's easy to say, well, Christina, I want to grow, but growth is something that has to be defined, and it has to do so in a very meaningful way. That way you can figure out, how you're going to reach career satisfaction. And if right now is the time for you to either, stay in your job or actually go ahead and make the change for yourself that you've been meaning to make for so long. So before we update, materials and get into that type of work, we need to zoom out and look at things from, a bird's eye view, I like to say, because clarity drives momentum. So when people say, well, Christina, I don't know what to do next, it's usually because they haven't done this reflection work. So I want you to ask yourself a couple things, and, feel free to chime in the chat as well. What parts of your day actually energize you? What is something that drains you throughout your day? Would you gladly spend hours doing what would you rather spend hours doing even if you weren't paid? What are some things that truly excite you? Also, what kind of outcomes or missions do you truly care about? For example, one of our clients realized that they actually loved mentoring junior staff, And that led to them considering training roles, something that they hadn't explored before. We had another client who realized that they hated back-to-back meetings and needed more of that independent type of work. So they shifted towards content strategy. And this is how you move from more of the vague dissatisfaction to real direction. It's not just about job titles, it's about values, skills, and energy. All right. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is setting a clear outcome for December. I want to set a short-term target goal with you all. I want you to start to think about this right now. Don't worry about your forever job. We're talking about your next right fitting opportunity. And if you don't set a destination, you'll end up chasing every shiny job posting that feels, close enough. So grab a pen, and I actually want you guys to write this down or type it out. By December 2025, where do you want to be? In what type of role, at what type of company, doing work that feels energizing, strategic, flexible. Just to give you an example today, an example might be, well, by year's end, I want to be in a remote project management role at a mission-driven company working with cross-functional teams and growing my leadership skills. As you can see, that clarity really becomes your filter. It keeps you focused, and it also keeps you aligned when fear or frustration is showing up during a job search. So I want you to write that down. Again, if this is something you want to think about right now and write down later, that is totally fine. But studies show, writing it down actually makes you more prone to doing it and holding yourself accountable as well. All right. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is your UVA. What is your unique value add? So your unique value add is the core of your professional brand. And it's even more important when you are someone who's making a pivot. You need to help employers connect the dots quickly. So to identify your UVA, you want to ask, first off, well, what types of problems do I consistently solve? Who benefits most from working with me? What do I do differently or better than others in similar roles? What am I known as that go-to person for? For example, a marketer that is pivoting maybe into product management might say, well, I help cross-functional teams bring digital experiences to market by blending customer insight with strategic thinking. That's her edge, and it's totally transferable, as you can see. So think about your past feedback, even wins on certain projects that you completed or other achievements, or even things that teammates just rely on you on. What do you constantly find people coming to you for? And, being that go-to person and, being so excited that they can come to you for that, either project or question or, specialty or skill set. Your UVA should show up on your resume. It should show up on your LinkedIn, both your profile and also content that you're developing, and even how you introduce yourself when you are networking and you're doing that outreach. It's not about the fluff. It's more so about focus. You're not trying to be everything to everyone. And I want you to all know that. You don't want to try to be perfect. You don't want to try to come off as the Jack or Jill of all trades. I say that a lot here at Work It Daily, because if you do, then it can confuse people. They might not understand your brand. And if you're highlighting 10 different areas or 10 different skills that you have under your belt, and they're all different areas, it's going to be hard for others to see that specific area that you're that go-to person for. And if recruiters are questioning that, they're not going to spend time figuring that out. They're just going to move on to the next candidate. All right. So you're showing what makes you valuable in this new direction. And that's something I want you to think about. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is that most people undersell themselves during a pivot because they're stuck in their title. And you need to move beyond titles and focus more on the functions. You don't need to just be stuck in an area. We find, for example, a lot of people will come into Work It Daily. Premium members will write to us in coaching and say, well, Christina, I'm feeling stuck. I don't know which job title I need to target. Can you tell me what I should do? And the answer is no, we can't tell you what to do, but we can help you figure out your strengths, your intrinsic motivation. We have a series of quizzes that you can go through. And from there, you can understand, what strengths you want to leverage, which passions that, you truly find invigorating. For example, if you were a restaurant manager and you want to go into corporate training, what were you really doing? You were teaching, you were onboarding, you have conflict resolution skills, you have time management skills. That's training in action, essentially. So what we recommend is thinking about, listing 10 to 15 of your core transferable skills that you use now, then pull maybe 3 to 5 job descriptions in your target role, if you have one right now, and highlight the overlap. You'll be surprised at how much of this aligns. And one of our premium members used this strategy to pivot from actually customer service into sales enablement, because she reframed her day-to-day as, persuasion, needs analysis, product knowledge delivery. And that's the same language hiring managers are looking for. So when you see, your own experience through this lens, you're going to build confidence, and confidence is something that allows you to get those interviews and sell yourself. So I hope that makes some sense. Bottom line is, you don't need a specific title. Right now, you just need to start to think about more of these transferable skills and how they overlap. What could you bring with you from, a past role that can translate over into work that you're targeting going forward? And that's what I want you to start jotting down. All right. So this is where your pivot becomes really powerful. When someone says, "So what do you do?" What do you say? If you're in transition or you're shifting directions, it's easy to stumble or even give a vague answer. That's why we coach members to use this simple formula, which is, I help, X audience solve X problem using X skill set. All right. This gives structure to your message and also more clarity for the listener. So for example, one member who actually pivoted from education to corporate L&D used something like, I help organizations build engaging onboarding programs using instructional design principles and live facilitation. This told hiring managers exactly what she could do and for whom. Don't worry about being clever. Just try to be really clear when you're explaining this value to others, as recruiters, as hiring managers, people in the team you want to work on. This sentence becomes essentially your elevator pitch, also known as your personal branding statement. It's also going to come into play with your LinkedIn headline, your about section, and the foundation just of your professional story. So practice saying this out loud, write it down a couple times, practice saying it, to others, to yourself. The more you own it, the more others will believe that as well. All right. Now, the next thing, so far we've talked about gaining perspective. We've talked about illuminating the goal. And the next thing I want to do is talk about owning your actions. And this is where a lot of people get stuck, not because they're not capable, but because they don't have a clear, realistic plan that fits their life and their game plan. So today we're going to start mapping that out. It's not a generic 10-step plan, but it's more of a model or framework that you can adapt based on your goals, your availability, and, overall the growth that you want to focus on going forward. So from this point on, I want you to shift from just thinking about this session as information, but start thinking about it as your game plan. So let's break this down together. Now, this is where strategy works to meet that sense of self-awareness. We often think that we need to go back to school or, get more certifications to pivot, but many times you're already about 80% qualified. You just haven't seen that alignment yet. So start by writing down all of the core skills that you currently use, not job duties. These actually need to be those transferable skills. Are you someone who is presenting? Are you doing some type of coordination, some type of analyzing, influencing? Great. Now in the second column, what I want you to do is look at job postings in your new space and ask, where do these skills apply? One member mapped, scheduling appointments to project coordination. It's the same skill, just a bit of different language. And then in the third column of that chart, I want you to list 1 to 2 skills that you may need to develop that maybe you don't have that full-on experience in. Maybe it's familiarity with a tool or learning industry jargon that is completely manageable. And this exercise will work to give you clarity, but it also helps you prioritize your learning and update your materials in a way that highlights your alignment, not your gaps. Does that make sense? All right. So next, accomplishments are what gives your pivot that sense of credibility. It's not enough to say that you can do the job. You have to show where you have delivered these results and your achievements. But here's the key. Those wins need to be told in a way that aligns with your new direction. Let's say you're someone who's pivoting from hospitality to customer success. When reduce guest complaints by 40% by overhauling front desk training. That becomes proof that you can manage customer relationships and solve those types of problems. So if you can quantify your results when possible, revenue increases, time saved, money generated, satisfaction scores, even growth percentages, etc. And try to focus on the impact, not just the task. Even when you're writing your resume, those bullet points for each role that you've held, you don't want to just list what you've done every day. You want to list powerful examples. You want to focus on the overall impact. Due to this achievement, how did you make an impact? And tie numbers in. Look for nouns in your bullets and tie numbers to those. These accomplishments should be front and center in your resume, in your LinkedIn profile as well. And then you should also tie them in when you're conducting formal interviews, you're answering questions from recruiters and hiring managers, but also in informational interviews as well. They are the evidence that hiring managers need to see that your experience actually translates. All right. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to position your resume when making a career pivot. First, it all starts with your top fold. That's a section a recruiter sees in the first 6 seconds. Your headline, your core skills, and other qualifying factors like education, technologies, etc. But this part needs to clearly communicate where you're going, not just where you've been. So align the top fold with the job that you're targeting. Use the title that you want to be seen as. And if you don't have a title in mind, use some of those skills. This actually helps reframe your brand for hiring managers and recruiters. And then what you want to focus on is those 2 columns of your transferable skills and then some tools underneath. These are the bridges between your past experience and your future goals, because you want to show, what you've already done and how that can apply in new context. So for example, if you are someone that's moving from maybe operations to project management, highlight things like process optimization, stakeholder communication, deadline tracking. Those translate well across industries, and those are hard skills. And the way that you know that is, ask yourself, can I quantify this? Then what you want to do is back that up with accomplishments that prove you've already been operating at that level that you're pivoting into. And you're going to write those as bullet points in your quantifiable accomplishments in your resume. So think about, how you can describe past wins that mirror the work that you'd be doing in your new role. Use metrics when possible and try to emphasize the impact over just day-to-day duties. All right. And above all, remember this golden rule. Your resume should reflect where you're going, not just what you've done before. Most people make the mistake of simply documenting their work history and just being very vague with that. But at Work It Daily, we teach you that your resume is a marketing tool. It is not a career obituary. So don't just list what you did. You actually need to position yourself as the solution to your problems, your future employers trying to solve. The other thing I wanted to mention is, if you're making a pivot and you are, taking additional experience, whether it's like a training, a certification, a program, anything educational, to learn skills that maybe you don't have right now on the side, then you can certainly add those to your resume. You would just put in progress to show recruiters that, these are your transferable skills that you have while making this pivot. And this is how you're actually gaining the rest of the skills that maybe you don't have the actual related experience in right now, that work experience, but you are taking it upon yourself to gain that additional experience. All right. And this mindset shift is what will actually help your materials stand out. And it's a big part of how you own your pivot with confidence. And the same things that you're doing with your resume, you want to do with your LinkedIn profile. The only difference I wanted to clarify right now is that you're not going to be customizing your LinkedIn profile for every job that you're targeting. You have one LinkedIn profile only. You can't just tweak that based on every job description. So try to make sure that you are revamping this with skills that you have and that where you're headed going forward, and scatter those through what we call your static profile. All right. Now, getting a little bit more into LinkedIn, this is often the first place that recruiters check, even before your resume. It's the world's number one networking platform, and that's where recruiters are vetting a lot of candidates. So if it still reflects your old career story, they'll likely pass if it doesn't relate to the job that you're targeting or skills that they're looking for. So right now is time to update it to match your pivot and match what you updated in your resume. Always update your resume first, then you can go into LinkedIn. Start with your headline. Don't just list your current job title, especially if you're someone who's making a pivot and your title right now is nothing like what you want to be doing in that next role. Then maybe you should just focus on keywords that align with the roles that you want, those transferable skills that you have. So for example, like if you're a project manager, maybe you can add in a couple skills like project management, process optimization, healthcare ops. That tells me what you're targeting. It shows that you're job specific and you are doing that keyword optimization. Next, in the about section, this is where you explain your shift. We like to recommend using a really brief, like 2 to 3 sentence maximum statement to highlight, your UVA, what you do and how you do this type of work and where you're headed going forward with this skill set. That is what allows you to stand out on the platform. And then following that with a list of your skills. All right. And then finally, add some posts, start to produce some content. We'll talk more about this in just a minute here, but that should reinforce your pivot as well. So, share articles, comment on trends, post a short story about a past project that aligns with your future. This actually creates a visible footprint that tells recruiters, I'm already operating in this space and this is what I do. Let me help you understand my brand a little bit better throughout these posts. Okay. So that is something I want you to focus on as well. Now, when it comes to your cover letter, this is where you take control of the narrative. Don't dance around the fact that you're pivoting. You need to actually own that. So with your cover letter at Work It Daily, we recommend what we call the disruptive cover letter. And this is actually something that we've created at Work It Daily. So what we recommend with this is to focus on your connection story to the company and also how you resonate. Think about it like this. You have your resume on one hand, which tells employers why you're qualified, how you check off the boxes for that role, but you also need to share how you're a fit for the company. And that's where your cover letter does just that. And if you are someone who's making a pivot, that is your chance to get into why you're making this shift and tie it to your values, tie it to your goals and your motivations and why you're just so passionate about this type of work. You want to connect the dots, show the hiring manager how your experience translates into the new role that they are hiring for. Use language from the job description. Even keep that side by side while you're writing your cover letter. Job description in one area, the cover letter right next to it, and match your skills and bring in some of that language to speak about how you solve for these types of challenges and why you're so passionate about this type of work so they can understand your pivot. For example, you might be saying something like, well, after 8 years in marketing, I'm actually pivoting into product because I've realized my strength lies in translating customer needs into action. I've spent my career working cross-functionally, maybe managing launches or analyzing performance, skills that directly support this role and, getting into the specifics there. And then you want to close strong. You want to express your excitement. You want to reiterate your value and ask for the opportunity to speak further. The tone of a cover letter, you don't want to keep it long-winded. It should be first off concise, like 2, maximum 3 paragraphs that are short. And, you want to keep it future focused and enthusiastic as well, while highlighting those 2 things, your connection story to the company and also, why you're making that pivot in terms of your passion, your value, and relate it to the job description for bonus points. All right. Okay. Awesome. So I know we touched on this a bit with content in LinkedIn, but I did want to get into this a little bit more. So one of the fastest ways to build credibility during a pivot is through content. And you might be thinking, well, why is this going to help me out? Well, because content is something that reflects action. It tells people, I'm already thinking like someone in this space. Start small. You don't need to be a thought leader. You just need to be really intentional with your efforts. So for example, if you're moving into DEI work, you could post a reflection on a team experience that shaped your view on inclusion. Or maybe if you're shifting into data analytics, you can share an article and add a comment on why it resonated. Maybe, how you feel connected to it, your thoughts on it. Even posting just once or twice a week, it's enough to start building visibility. And once you get in a good flow of producing more of that content, you can increase it. Maybe you can start posting a couple times per week, which lead to a couple times per day. You can schedule out posts to help. You can set aside like a time block at the beginning of your week to get all your posts up and ready to go. Recruiters do check your activity, especially if your resume hints at a pivot. And if your content reinforces your new direction, they're going to see consistency and alignment. And this also gives your network a way to support you. When people understand what you're moving toward, they can think of you when opportunities do come up. Because we'll get into this in just a second, but when you're networking, and we recommend it Work It Daily, starting with what we call your bucket list, you're then going to start doing outreach to people who work at those companies. And when you start connecting with them on LinkedIn and they accept, your content will go in their feed. So if they see your content and you're connecting with recruiters who make an impact on the decision-making process, or maybe managers that would be on your team, and they see it, they might say, well, I think we should have a conversation with this person. I like what I'm seeing in their content, and they seem to really know what they're talking about and potentially could add value to our department. So we'll get into that in just a second, but that's really the goal here. All right. And now we've actually reached the final step of the GLOW method, which is working it daily. And this is the part where the real growth happens, not just from a one-time push, but from consistent effort over time. It comes from showing up week after week and staying committed to your own plan. This is all about accountability in the end. You are the only one who can make this happen from yourself. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be consistent with your efforts when it comes to working it daily. And that is how you build that sense of momentum. And ultimately, that's something that turns growth into opportunity. So you can start reaching your goals. If you're looking to land a job in the next couple months or by the new year, or as soon as possible, you need to start now as opposed to keeping on pushing that off. All right. So I know we touched on this a couple minutes ago, but I did want to dive a bit deeper. Now that you've clarified your direction and you've built your brand, it's time to go from reactive to proactive. So instead of waiting for the right job to show up, you decide who you want to work for. We don't recommend just going on LinkedIn and scrolling through all the job descriptions and just going and applying. You don't know if you're going to hear back. You are, competing against hundreds, even thousands of candidates, and it's not as intentional. It's not really strategic here. You can apply. I would, make sure that you are 90 to 100% qualified. But if not, then you want to circumvent the applicant tracking system, the ATS. So what we recommend is to start by creating a blueprint for your job search. Create a target list of 10 to 20 companies to start. If you want to go smaller, maybe 5 to 10 to start, that is completely fine. You can always add companies as you go. And when you start to add more companies, you're going to notice themes with, why you feel connected to that company. Maybe it's the size, maybe it's a mission, maybe it's the values, and that'll help you find other companies to add to your list to keep those options open. So these should align with, like I said, your values, your work style, your career goals, that type of thing. So research their leadership, follow these people on LinkedIn, follow the companies on LinkedIn, check recent news. Are they growing? Are they launching something new? Do you support the products and services that they sell? We had a member targeting mid-size, mission-driven healthcare companies. She picked 12. She followed those key leaders. She engaged weekly. She did this outreach on a consistent basis. Wasn't spending hours a day. I'd say maybe like 30 to maybe 45 minutes. But within 2 months, one of them posted a role that fit her pivot, and she already had visibility with the recruiter. So just know that targeting will actually save you time, and it also helps you focus your energy where it matters most. I want you to know that not all job leads come from those job applications. All right. Many come from relationships. So we need to start building those relationships now. That way, if you start to connect with people at your bucket list companies, there might not be positions available now, but you can at least become, on that list that they then could reach out to for when a position does become available. All right. Quality beats quantity, and strategy wins over mass applications. I want you to remember that. All right. And like I said, back channeling is the secret weapon of modern job search. It means building real relationships with people at companies that you want to work for even before you apply. If you have a job in mind that you see, maybe hold off and see if you could get some tips from the hiring manager or recruiter before and reach out to them. So start by reaching out, start small, 3 to 5 employees at each of your target companies. They don't just have to be people in HR. It's often better to connect with peers or leaders in the department that you actually want to eventually work in at that company. So begin by maybe commenting on their posts, maybe resharing company updates, or replying to a post that they shared or messaging them about it. Even after a few interactions, you can send a friendly DM introducing yourself and asking for some advice, hearing about their experience, not just, asking for a job. You never want to ask for something right off the bat. All right. So for example, maybe you can say something like, well, hi Tom, I'm pivoting into L&D after 8 years in hospitality. I admire how you made that shift into tech. Any insights for someone that's just starting that journey? Can we connect? That's all you have to say. This way, you're not just, blindly connecting with them and they don't know who you are, what you want to get out of that conversation. You're actually explaining that to them first. So you're more likely to have them accepting your request. People are more likely to help when there is that sense of trust, when there is curiosity and also a shared interest. A lot of people, love to just talk about what they do. And, a lot of people are actually more prone to giving advice than you might think. And those warm conversations often lead to referrals. They can lead to interviews, whether it's maybe starting with an informational interview and then landing a formal interview, or just even gaining insider information that can help you figure out how to stand out and if you truly want to work at that company. So back channeling is a really key piece. The other thing I wanted to mention next is preparing for tough interview questions. So you need to be ready for what we call those pivot questions. These are designed to test how intentional your change is and also whether you've done your homework or not. So first up, why are you making this change? Don't apologize. A lot of people like to say, well, sorry, I should have explained myself. Instead, you need to be clear and enthusiastic and confident. For example, I realize that my strength is in cross-functional strategy, and I'm really excited to apply it to more focused product role. And let me get into the specifics. The other thing is, the other question you want to think about to expect is, well, what makes you qualified? And that's your moment to connect your transferable skills to their specific needs and their challenges. All right. Even putting together what we call the job matching matrix that we talk a lot about Work Daily. We have seen that land many, many candidates job offers. For example, if you're speaking about this, you might say something like, well, in my previous role, I led cross-team launches, managed stakeholder communication. I used customer insights to improve workflows, and those directly support the goals of this role. And then get into more of the specifics there. All right. And then finally, the last question, well, aren't you overqualified or do you have enough experience? You want to reframe both of those things. For example, I bring a depth of experience that lets me hit the ground running and a beginner's mindset that keeps me curious. It keeps me adaptable. And let me tell you why. So these questions aren't roadblocks. They are opportunities to reinforce your own story. You want to go ahead and practice out loud. You want to use what we call our experience plus learn equals grow framework. You want to walk yourself through that before you even go into an interview. Even right now, if you're someone that doesn't have an interview lined up and you are slowly kind of deciding now that you want to make this pivot for yourself, you can start to practice this. Answer those questions, write that down. Studies show that even writing down your responses and then going and practicing out loud, it helps you memorize it some more, which ultimately will make you sound more rehearsed, like you've done your research. And that leads to confidence in interviews as well. So that way, you know exactly what you should be saying, what framework to use, and how to really just approach those tough pivot questions that will come up, especially if you don't have all of the experience. And the other thing that I wanted to mention as well is, when you are going through and making a pivot and thinking about your strategy, if employers don't see you as 100% qualified for that role that you're targeting, and, you apply and just hope for the best, even if you've customized the heck out of your resume, chances are they're probably going to reject you if you don't, 90 to 100% qualify for that position. So you want to actually have the chance to circumvent that and tell your story before they make assumptions about you and your brand. Okay. Because if you're someone that maybe has some of these transferable skills, maybe 80%, there are lots of elements of the job that you can actually be trained upon. We say a lot here at Work It Daily, you are being, assessed on 3 different things when it comes to the interview process. Personality, does your personality fit in well with the rest of the team? Experience, well, do you have the experience to do the job? Self-explanatory. And then aptitude, do you have the drive to do the job the way that the employer wants you to do it? And we have seen candidates who lacked some of that experience but had a great personality that the recruiter loved, thought would really mesh well with the rest of the team. They had, so much enthusiasm, and they had so much aptitude and passion to do the job that, the way the employer wanted them to do it. So they ended up getting the job apart from the person who was 100% qualified, maybe even more qualified than that. The other person lacked that personality. They weren't showing the aptitude. And, it just shows that you can land the offer apart from those other people that you're competing against, even if they're more qualified than you. Because just know that there are certain skills, there are certain technologies and tools that you, of course, can be trained on. But you need to communicate your value. You need to be authentic to yourself and, do this preparation beforehand. So that way, you know how to stand out and you know how to, market your skills and show how you add value and solve for those challenges, while also showing, that connection to the company that you truly are passionate about. All right. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is reframing objections proactively. Reframing is one of the most powerful tools in your pivot toolbox. Instead of reacting defensively to concerns, you need to address them before they're even asked. Like I said, if you sense a hiring manager is worried that you are overqualified, lean into the advantage. And I do see that we have actually a question about this in the chat. So you can say something like, well, yes, I bring a lot of experience, but that means I'm not learning the basics. I'm someone that can contribute quickly. I can mentor junior team members. I bring outside perspective that challenges the status quo. And let me tell you more about that. And if they think that you lack direct experience, then flip the narrative. Okay. For example, saying something like, well, that's true. I haven't worked in your exact space. I want to be honest about that. But my experience in X gave me a unique view on Y, which is directly relevant to this role's goals. And let me get into that some more. One of our members said once, I may be new to fintech, but I'm not new to solving tough problems and moving environments. And that's something that really stuck with me because I like to see the different ways in which people word their pivots to communicate their value and show, these objectives, reframing the objectives proactively. That line I just mentioned actually got that woman a second interview. So you want to own your pivot. You need to also frame it as something that's intentional, that's strategic and valuable for yourself. And if you're someone who truly believes it and you have this confidence in yourself, then they will as well. Okay. And then I want to talk about building momentum daily. Again, this is a big part of that work at daily section of the equation. Pivoting isn't a one-time update. It's not just a one and done. It's a daily commitment to small strategic actions. And you can always continue to do better for yourself. You can always push yourself to grow. You can always challenge yourself. And that's something that you want to be doing, regardless of if you're making a pivot or not. But start by sharing value, like I said, on LinkedIn once a week. That could be a short story. It could be a tip from a past role. It could be something you're learning new in your space. Even if, like I said, you're in a pivot and you're getting connected with these recruiters and hiring managers, if you start to post about content in terms of how you're solving these problems, how you're gaining these skill sets, it's going to really wow them. It keeps you visible and it also builds that sense of credibility, which is so important and something that we talk about a lot here at Work It Daily. And then second is to build your network. Like I said, connect with 2 to 3 people per week. That could be peers, mentors, recruiters, even alumni from school that maybe are in a similar industry as to where you want to be. And try to personalize your invites. Mention something that you admire or that you have in common with them. And then finally, try to keep track of these things. Maybe write it down in your notebook or use a spreadsheet or a notes app, anything. Follow up with people, jot down the last time you reached out and then make a note as to when you should be reaching out again to stay consistent and proactive. You want to thank them if they're giving you insight. You want to be really responsive as well if you are, doing these informational interviews and you're in the middle of these conversations and, building that sense of rapport. Okay. And of course, try to share updates. Momentum comes from consistency. And when you're someone who's pivoting, consistency builds that sense of trust as well. So if you do one small thing every single day, like I said, even 10 minutes, even 15 minutes, engage, share, connect, you're going to be amazed at what opens up in 30 to 60 days. Even little things, if you only have time at the end of your day, maybe you had a full long day at work, it was a long Monday, even just give yourself 10 minutes to maybe complete one lesson at Work It Daily and complete that exercise. And then the next day, get back in, pick up where you left off. That is what holds you accountable and what will allow you to see results over time, because you're going to have small wins, which contribute to your bigger wins of hopefully landing that next new role. Okay. So I hope that helps. That is how we tie it all together. Consistency is key, and that's how you're going to work it daily. All right. So that's what makes up the GLOW method. And that's what's going to be your framework on this mid-year career reset plan. All right. If we have any questions, I know we only have a couple minutes here, but before we move into the Q&A, I did want to share a special offer for those of you who are joining us live today. Right now, you can unlock our full Work It Daily premium coaching experience for just $69 a month. That is actually $10 off our regular $79 a month rate. So this offer gives you everything that you need to stay supported, focused, and consistent with your career growth. So here's what's included. First off, access to 6 targeted career and job search courses, which are very specific on what I'd like to compare to like action plans as to what you should be doing to reach success in your job search and land a new job. We have templates, we have sample materials, we have lots of exercises and homework that you're going to be completing along with us, and lots of videos to help you move forward. We also have weekly member-only live events. We give you access to our own private career community. We also give you one-on-one personalized career coaching, unlimited email coaching from our team. And with that comes, like I said, the personalized resume, LinkedIn, cover letter reviews. You can continuously submit those until they're good to go, and our coaches give you that approval. We also have lots of templates. We have scripts. We have job tools. We even have assessments that you can take. And then we also give you some exclusive features like our JT.ai and career-to-career quizzes as well inside our community. All right. So to claim your discount code, click the link in the event details on either YouTube or LinkedIn and use our promo code JULYCOACH at checkout. All right. It's a limited time offer, and it's only available to those who are attending today's session or watching the recording. And we are also launching something new this week, which is super, super exciting. Going along with the layout of last month's training, we are now going to be hosting a brand new event series that goes hand in hand with this monthly LinkedIn event around the topic of, career reset. So starting this Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time, which is tomorrow, any premium members can join us for a special 3-week micro training series that dives deeper into today's topic. So each Thursday, we're going to host an informational session focused on strategy for career reset. This will help you build out your personalized growth plan, and also we'll take time in those sessions to answer questions that you have. If you're going through and maybe you hit a roadblock along the way, come to that session and ask your question, because we want to give you the clarity that you need to push through and move forward. So, of course, if you've enjoyed this training and you want to keep the momentum going, now is the perfect time to join our premium membership, and it is a limited time offer. All right. And you'll get access to those live sessions and the full coaching experience right away. And if you want to rewatch today's event, you can do so. We'll record it and store it in our community as well. All right. Awesome. Okay, so let's see some questions. I see Christine's now at the end. I did cover that one closer to the end of the session about getting over the perception of being overqualified and how to approach those. We even have some templates that you can go back and rewatch that we covered today. Let's see what other questions we have. Christine also asked, can you take a minute to explain the top fold? Yes, the top fold is the area at the top of your resume where you are basically including a couple things: contact information, a skill-related headline, in this case, listing those transferable skills, and then underneath 2 columns of your hard/transferable skills that are customized and pulled from that job description. Then under that, any other, qualifying factors like education you have, technologies or tools that relate to this new industry that you have experience in, languages, other licenses, major certifications that are relevant to that area, things like that. I hope that helps. All right, let's see what other questions. I'm seeing some questions about if this session's being recording, and the answer is yes. And we will have that available on our YouTube channel and also inside of our community. Awesome. All right. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for being here today. This has been an excellent session. I am also loving the engagement that I'm seeing as well. And before we wrap up, I wanted to leave you with a few words of encouragement, because if there's one thing we've learned from coaching thousands and thousands of professionals here at Work It Daily, it's that career growth isn't about you being perfect. It's about you being intentional and making this change for yourself, especially with this month's topic, doing a career reset and, finding work that truly excites you and that will allow you to reach that career satisfaction. That is something that is really important that I want you to stick with. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be intentional with your efforts. Growth doesn't require a flawless plan. It requires being, having that sense of commitment, being consistent, and a willingness to try. Also, clarity comes from action, not overthinking. If you're feeling unsure, overwhelmed, take a small step. Only spend a little bit of time each day. Maybe you don't have the bandwidth to sit there for 30 minutes. Maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes going through a quick lesson. And then also, the best investment that you can make in yourself is in yourself, because, whether it takes 30 minutes or, a single certification, the time and energy that you invest in your own development will always pay off. All right. So you all showed up for yourself today. You are here to make this career reset, and that is what matters. All right. So wherever you go from here, I want you to just know that we truly at Work It Daily believe in your ability to figure it out, to grow through it, and to make the next move your best one yet. All right. Thank you to everyone for being here today. Just a reminder that our micro training series is starting tomorrow. Again, that is only available for our premium members. So I would love to see all of you there. Again, we'll take questions in those sessions, and we're going to be doing a deeper dive on the strategy that we touched on today across the 3 weeks, and getting more into the specifics there. All right. Thank you to everyone for being here today. Great engagement, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.